Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
The Krulak Center is proud to start the 2022 season with a special broadcast episode featuring Col Andy Milburn and a roundtable discussion with Team Krulak members. In the room were Lieutenant Colonel Manuel Zepeda, Deputy Director of the Krulak Center, Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Kobeck, Operations and Outreach Officer, Major John Berman of the Center for Regional and Security Studies, and myself. Special thanks go out to Dr. Rebecca Johnson, Vice President of Academic Affairs for Marine Corps University, and the leadership of Command and Staff College for making this interview with Col Milburn possible.
Good morning, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. One reminder before we start, all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, the United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So we're into a new year, and Team Krulak is very excited to kick off the 2020 broadcast season with this special episode. Today we're joined by Col Andy Milburn, United States Marine Corps retired, who's spending a couple of days here at Marine Corps University in support of several academic programs, and was gracious enough to carve out some time from his schedule to visit us here at the center. Col Milburn retired from the Marine Corps in 2019 as the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command Central, the headquarters responsible for all U.S. special operations in the Middle East. As an infantry and special operations officer, he has had operational command at every rank, to include leading the Marine Raider Regiment and a multinational special operations task force given the mission of defeating ISIS in Iraq. He's a prolific author on military affairs, with publications that include his critically acclaimed memoir, When the Tempest Gathers, and articles for a number of publications to include The Atlantic, USA Today, The Hill, War on the Rocks, the Modern War Institute, and Task and Purpose. He is on the adjunct faculty of the Joint Special Operations University and teaches classes on leadership, planning, ethics, command and control, mission command, risk, special operations, and irregular warfare at U.S. and British military schools. He is a co-host of the Modern War Institute's Irregular War podcast and Irregular War Initiative, and also serves as the non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. So, sir, welcome. We're happy to have you here and happy to let you have any
Ian,
comments.
fellas, thanks very much for inviting me. This is actually, I'm not going to say this already, everything I'm doing, but it's great thrill being able to do this. I'm really excited about what the Krulak Center is doing. I'm excited about getting an opportunity to be part of that. And I'm even excited to be back in Quantico, although I think I'm probably remembering events here with rosy tinted lenses, because I'm sure I didn't enjoy them that much at the time.
Okay, well, we're very happy to have you here. I'm glad you took the time out to come and visit here. Yeah, Quantico does kind of have looks better in the rearview mirror. So today, to kind of start the discussion, we went through some of the articles you talked about, and we were actually talking earlier this morning about something which is sort of a theme in some of those articles, which is institutional culture. The good, the bad, and the ugly, and what needs to change. And one of the big themes you have is the sort of the dichotomy between what we say and what we do, both in the U.S. military and the Marine Corps, in terms of mission command. Right? We say we want to empower our subordinates because that gives us better tempo, that lets us do more actions out there at the pointy edge to get ahead of our adversary. But there are some institutional challenges that sometimes make it hard to actually cultivate that in our people. So reading through that, in one article you mentioned how we need a cultural transformation, overhauling selection, training, personnel management. And reading that, it really seemed to echo a lot of things in General Berger's new talent management and guidance. So first question is sort of wondering, looking at what's in that talent management document and sort of the aspirational vision, do you think that's starting to move in the right direction of that overhaul you talked about?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I wrote that, and then this is displaying my ignorance, having been out of the Corps for 2 years. After writing it, I became more familiar with General Berger's plans for talent management, which I think, I think they're right on target, and no one paid me to say that in this podcast. But just take a step back. I know it's very easy to be critical of an organization, and I don't write simply to be critical. I always try. If I am critical, I always try and suggest a solution, because I was part of this organization for 31 years, very proud to be part of the organization. But one thing that, because I loved the organization, was part of it, one thing that consistently frustrated me was this kind of say-do gap when it came to maneuver warfare. And I don't think that's really any secret, right? I came here when I was still on active duty. I was invited back, curiously enough, I think it was 2018, to a TCOM conference, and the theme of the conference is why the Marine Corps is finding it difficult or is unable to adopt maneuver warfare in practice, kind of 30 years on from when General Gray brought it in. And so, the other great thing about being retired, aside from being able to criticize the organization that you work for, is the fact that you have a little more time to think. A lot of thoughts have kind of come together and coalesced when I was on active duty. I was kind of in the rush of things, and I wasn't thinking quite so clearly. That's the best way of putting it. And when you think back to when the Marine Corps, I'm talking about culture, right? And I'm talking why talent management is such an important part of this. When Al Gray steered the Marine Corps towards this thing then called maneuver warfare, and he had a really talented doctrine writer, right? Schmidt, what was his first name?
John Schmidt.
Yeah, John Schmidt, and those doctrinal publications are kind of timeless. I mean, they've been modified over the years, but they're great. They're terrific publications. But in the end, that's what they are, right? They're only one part of the puzzle of the piece, and by themselves they can't bring around cultural transformation. That is what we need, because while we say we espouse maneuver warfare, like any military or U.S. military organization, it's a very highly competitive organization. People are, we do a good job in curtailing our ambition, but nevertheless, everyone wants to go ahead and to the next rung in the ladder. And really adopting maneuver warfare and practicing it entails taking risk, right? I mean, of course it does it with stupor and everything, but it's more than about that. You've got to also have subordinates who are really chomping at the bit, have a bias for action, and are really happy being able to operate with a blank sheet of paper. And so it isn't just about, when you hear people say, "Oh, we've got too many micromanagers," that's not by any means. That's not even part of the story. It's I wouldn't say cultural defect, but it's a cultural shortcoming throughout the organization that we need to overcome. And bottom line is, we're not necessarily, and this is, I know I'm on thin ice here, but we're not always selecting the right people among our officers. Yes, I know Marine officers are the best of any service, blah, blah, blah. And, if you're on a joint duty tour, you're told this will be a Marine Corps appreciation tour, et cetera, et cetera. We're so busy pounding our chests that we don't necessarily recognize that we could be much better. Okay, so talent management, let's talk about how you do change this. You got to look at the entry-level process to begin with, right? I understand on the enlisted side, we are severely curtailed by a number of things. And, we do a pretty good job. The Marine Corps does a phenomenal job recruiting through recruit training. I've been involved in that process. Many of us have. It's not easy, and it's very easy to criticize it. On the officer side, though, I would say we can certainly do better, especially now, where arguably the requirements of modern warfare, and we can talk about that later in the podcast, are such that you really do need guys who are intellectually acute. We in the Marine Corps, again, say-do gap, we've always said we've espoused, I'm just giving examples of talent management and what we need to do. So we've always said that we've espoused professional military education, the warrior's most powerful weapon is his mind, blah, blah, blah. And yet, Marine Corps is full of officers who brag about barely making it through college, having low GPAs. How many PhDs do we have in the Marine Corps? All right, we've only just recently started a program where we're sending officers to get PhDs and yet still keeping them competitive, right? Hopefully, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, the Air Force and the Army have been doing this for years. How many guys do we have on fellowships? I mean, civilian fellowships as an alternate to professional PME. I'm talking not just USAID or State Department or other government agencies. I'm talking also perhaps, corporations. It's just casting our net wide as far as education. I'll give you another example. FAOs, right? One of my favorite topics. Since we've gone into the wars, way back 2001, November 2001, and then again Iraq, we've talked about the importance of language, cultural training. We even have, I don't know if it's still here, the KOC, is that still around?
So I'm now I'm the sole runner of that.
Awesome.
As the Center for Regional Security Studies.
Okay, great. So that should be a mainstay of our our operational training. We espouse all, we say all this, and yet what happens to officers who elect to go the FAO route? And I'm speaking here as a failed applicant. I was my commanding officer at every battalion and regimental level turned down my package, and they explained to me they were doing me a favor. How does that work? They were doing me a favor, and they probably were, because I certainly wouldn't have made colonel if I'd gone the FAO route. I mean, you've probably all met guys who are really good FAOs, proficient in their languages, but because it isn't a mainstay. This guy was not an operations officer. He wasn't. He didn't go through the Stations of the Cross of whatever MOS he was in. Therefore, he's an outsider. Therefore, yeah, it's really cool what he does, but he's not going to get ahead in the Marine Corps. So, I'm just giving examples because it's easy for me to bang the table and say, well, we got to get better at talent management. All right, let's look at entry-level officer. Not entry-level officer training. Let's just talk about assessing officers coming in. In today's climate, as I mentioned, not just because of the requirements of modern war, but because we probably have more applicants, many more applicants in places for Marine officers. It seems as though right now our means of assessing or bringing in officers is a little haphazard. All right, what happens when you become an officer? When you want to become an officer, you go to your OSA. What happens? How are you selected? Right now, do you remember? So long ago.
You got to finish college. That was about it, right?
Yeah.
Conversation and a couple questions over what your priorities may be based off how they sell, the traits that they think.
That's right.
Beneficial in that.
Yeah.
And you got to have a high PFT score.
Yeah. So high PFT, now GPA, I suppose, they're all factors, but it's like, it's like one or two guys' opinion. The Brits and the Australians have a three-day board, all right, which involves a battery of interviews with serving officers. They scrutinize your record at college and high school, extracurricular activities, character reports, and they put you through a battery of tests. They not just like GCT type intellectual tests, but emotional intelligence tests. And, can you get along with other people around you? Psychological profiling, and you do a series of leadership reaction courses. All right, not necessarily the one-dimensional ones we kind of did at OCS, but leadership reaction courses that present you with tough problems to see how you work both as a leader or supporting the leader if you're a member of the group, and how you approach tasks when you're given a task that is proving to be impossible, right? The levels of frustration under time. So these are all these are all valid tests, right? These are all things that absolutely we want, qualities we want in our officers. But why don't we test for them at assessment? Why do we, I mean, and then subsequently when we do promotion boards, look, I'm not suggesting, for instance, we should do that also for promotion. But the fact that we base our promotion selection system on hierarchical performance evaluation is archaic, in this day and age. It should, I believe it should be 360. Absolutely should be 360, because your peers and your subordinates are perhaps the fairest judges of your overall performance. Now, I've heard all the counter arguments that this would encourage officers to pander to their subordinates. But you know what? Marines, my experience of Marines is they don't want an officer who panders to them, right? They can see through that in a heartbeat. And by and large, in Marines, especially, when we're talking 360, you're not talking like every single lance corporal in the battalion writing, and I mean, you're talking, senior enlisted guys. They are extremely fair judges of character, and your peers too. So why don't we do that? I mean, what could possibly hurt us? Now, the way the performance evaluation system is now is, I suppose, as fair as it could be, given its hierarchical, antiquated approach. And any human system is going to be fallible. But anyway, so then I could go on, but I'll just say one more thing. Okay, a plea for intellect. Time and time again, when I've come across officers who just don't seem to get it, right? Whether it's the leadership piece or just being able to adapt, all right? Where there's an ongoing discussion in the Marine Corps right now, for instance, about our adaptation, our ability to adapt to war in the Pacific against China. And there was a lot of consternation when the commandant started making changes within the Marine Corps, from officers who are either very tied to specific MOSs or capabilities that in their limited experience they felt was absolutely essential, but they didn't look back at our history as a Marine Corps and how we've had to adapt consistently from the land battles of the First World War to the Banana Wars to, because of the influence of kind of a lone wolf alcoholic, Pete Ellis, who kind of dragged us into, amphibious warfare doctrine. That's the way we have survived. But my point is that when I've come across officers who appear obstinate, 9 times out of 10, it has been a question, I realize, of intellect. And it didn't occur to me until, as a senior colonel, I was trying to figure out what does this guy not get? And frankly, it is. We can say it. We need guys who are brighter. And we've got plenty of bright officers. I get it. We are fortunate. But we also have plenty of officers who, quite frankly, are too dumb for their rank. And because they have, a high and tight, and it used to be shiny boots or whatever, and they speak with a deep voice, and they play football at college or whatever, we automatically think they're a good guy and we go on promoting them. Or they fake a Southern accent, or, there's certain things, right, that are like mainstream Marine Corps. This guy, he's a good old boy. Excellent. We must, he looks and sounds like a Marine. Let's just keep promoting him beyond his capability. We've got to ditch that approach. Intellect, all important. You should be tested continuously on your intellectual curiosity. What have you learned? And we don't do that at all. Our PME schools are gentlemen's courses. All right, I'll stop that.
All right, sir.
You asked the question.
I did, but I think that actually dovetails nicely the intellect and then the education piece into a question Lieutenant Colonel Kovac had ginned up yesterday. So, sir, do you want to?
He's blaming you, so it's obviously going to be a hard question.
No, it was just something reading through similar thoughts, just following that line of thinking is, what recommendations do you have in general that PME can or should play in that cultural revolution? And then are there any specific recommendations that you might have based off of what you've seen?
Yeah, great question. So I already mentioned that I think the Marine Corps should offer more civilian fellowships. Okay, let me take a step back. Okay, I mentioned PhDs. All right, don't get me wrong. I don't think that there is necessarily a straight line correlation between number of PhDs and the organization's its willingness to embrace education, but it is one indicator, right? I would like to see that program expanded, and not just technical, not just PhDs and technical degrees. I mean, history is all important, and I'm wallowing here. I'm trying to think of other topics, but the point is, it doesn't have to be. These don't have to be topics directly related to our profession. Number two, because I want to expand a little bit on this, fellowships. We used to offer, I know, a fellowship to USAID. I don't know if we still do. That was a great example.
So there is a CMC fellowship program right out of MCU, which I can't rattle off the list of every organization, but it does branch out beyond like interagency.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so I think that should be expanded. The ability to for PME to attend more civilian schools. The Kennedy School of Governance is one example that I know the Marine Corps does offer a place to, but more opportunities like that. Now within our resident PME, I think, honestly, I think we're doing I think the organization is doing a great job right now. And for me to, I'm looking at, and I've just had a snapshot of looking at the discussions that take place, the topics that are taught, the faculty that the Marine Corps has. I mean, it's so much improvement on what it was 20 years ago. So I think certainly the Corps is heading in the right direction. I would be interested to hear a little bit from you all about the Commandant's plans for an examination, not kind of gentleman's examination milestones within the PME process. Is that ringing a bell, or am I missing the target?
So I know I think it was last year when they shifted the fitness reports from non-observed for PME to observed.
Oh, really?
Academic reports. So I think it's a different flavor of fit rep still, but it's now observed. So there are actual comments that your instructor or your back caddy can put in there.
Good.
And also now at Command and Staff College, the MMS, the Master of Military Studies, is mandatory. It's no longer an optional thing.
Excellent.
So everyone's got to do some research and produce, dig deeper into some detail on a contemporary military subject. Yeah,
those are great initiatives. I mean, belated. That these things I think should have happened a decade or two ago. It never. I always thought that we took. That collectively we kind of looked at school as a time to relax and kick back, and I understand that. Approach because we were at war, et cetera, but there was certainly, you could certainly ride it out while at school, and it just seems such a waste. This is absolutely an important part of our progression, and you just how can you be ready for promotion if you're not or qualified for promotion, qualified to keep climbing up the ladder if you're not continuously improving yourself? And our schools previously were not doing a good job of ensuring that you could ride it out, right? And I mean, as long as you didn't go kind of UA or violate the UCMJ, it was kind of cooperate and graduate attitude. We made those ridiculous jokes about, it's only enough reading, it's only too much reading if you do it, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, it's like, come on, dude.
So something that we have been chewing on here, sir, is the differentiation between the industrial age learning and the 21st century learning in light of new technologies and all the things that are coming onto the scene that not only impact the way we can educate, but also the manner in which we can manifest warfare. So your thoughts on that and how PME and that perspective can be impacted?
Yeah, that's also a great question. Again, I haven't been primed to say that every question you guys ask, but it is because his dilemma, not a dilemma, but a question that has been bothering me. It's been forefront of my mind for the last year or so. So I'm really fortunate now to be working part-time, as a contractor. It does make me shudder when I use that term contractor, but that's what I am. Out in 29 Palms with McTog as a mentor, I suppose you would call it. The title is subject matter expert, but I cringe at the thought of me being an expert at anything. But nevertheless, a mentor to battalion regimental commanders going through the MACTAF warfighting exercise. These are really capable officers, obviously, who've been selected for command, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, consistently, commanders and units struggle out there adapting to the environment that replicates peer-on-peer with full spectrum, a multi-domain, whatever you want to call it, operations, right? And I think it's because, well, there's a number of reasons. I mean, one of which gets back to our discussion earlier about the fact that we espouse maneuver warfare as a doctrine, but we haven't really adopted it. Now that we are potentially preparing for conflict, in a conflict in which we are going to have to rely on implicit communication, for widely dispersed all units, with a high, having to operate in an environment where once we start communicating, chances are we can be located and therefore attacked very rapidly. So yes, all these things that we talked about in our doctrinal publications become more important, but also there's kind of a fundamental shift in, and I always get this mixed up. Some people say, well, the nature of war changes, the character doesn't. Others say the character of war changes. It doesn't matter, but there's a fundamental shift in the methodology of warfare, right? Perhaps akin to what happened 100 years ago at the outset of the First World War, when everyone started to realize, but they realized slowly after millions of casualties, wow, the defense really is now the strongest, the strongest stance. But similarly now, with long-range precision weapons, by that I'm not talking about Chinese counter-ship weapons, although that is part of it. I'm talking at the tactical level, the use of expendable blue-collar drones combined with loitering munitions. Other countries and soon non-state actors are way ahead of us in this. You look at what the Turks are doing. This isn't just something that MWX manufactures to stump unwary commanders coming through. Let's just take Turkey as an example, right? Turkey, defense budget, maybe, I'm maybe 1,000th of ours, and yet look at what they started experimenting with blue-collar drones, right? I say blue-collar drones, I mean drones like the TP2, which is sophisticated enough for electro-optical, target designation. You could mount, conceivably, I don't know if the Turks are already doing this, but you could mount signals intelligence on that thing, although then it wouldn't be quite so expendable. But they mass-produce these things, and they use them in combination with loitering munitions like the Israeli-manufactured Harop, and they've proven they can overcome the most sophisticated IADs, right? Not, I know people say that Nagorno-Karabakh was an aberration, but when you really read about what happened there, it is a little frightening, because the Armenians, they didn't have like a Stone Age, they didn't have like a Second World War generation ADA system. They had very advanced systems, and this combination of expendable drones and loitering munitions just tore through it. And then you've seen on the YouTube videos what happened to the Armenian armored columns in the wake of that. But the Turks have been working up to that, all right? They had already been experimenting in Syria, in Libya. If you track when General Haftar was advancing on Tripoli, I want to say this was 2019, he was turned around by drones, all right? And not, again, it was Turkish drones, and again, in conjunction with loitering munitions, in the hands of militiamen, all right? So here's another scary thing. You don't have to be, a super well-trained guy. I mean, you have to be trained in that particular field, but you don't need to be even a professional soldier to be able to work this. Haftar's army was turned around, and then we talked about NK, and then most recently, this has been absolutely below the radar as far as the media. Do you remember just a couple of months ago, the Tigrayan army was like 100 kilometers away from Addis? And it really looked like Addis might fall. Have you heard what has happened? They were turned around. You know why? Drones. Turkish manufactured drones. All right, so we just are not paying attention to what's going on in the world around us. And meanwhile, what we're doing is we're still teaching squads to close with and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver with their organic weapons. And those weapons are now obsolete, because unless you carefully prepare the conditions to get that squad anywhere near the enemy, they're going to be destroyed en route. And we see it time and time again at MWX, right? And I'm talking, yes, unmanned systems, but of course, preparing conditions also means thinking of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is nothing new to you guys, but thinking that as part of our toolkit for combined arms, right? Jamming as a form of suppression, signals intelligence, pushed down to and habitually used at the tactical level. All of these things are within our capability, but we are not doing them. We're not doing them. I can't tell you how many numbers of Steel Knight type assaults in MWX that units still try, all right, with SEADs, whatever, that get torn up because we're not adapting, we're not reading what's going on, and we're not training and educating. And coming to MWX and trying to shoehorn all this education into 2 weeks, learning by trial and error is not the way to do it. We need to approach this at all of our schools.
Yeah, so actually that leads into another thing that jumped out at me from several of your articles. You talking about this new world in which it's the kill chain is what ties these long range precision fires and the sensors and everything together, and being able to complete it with responsive sensors is sort of that shift I think you're talking about. But that previous discussion, our cultural slow ability to adapt right now. What are some of the challenges that you see sort of on our side from being able to effectively complete the kill chain with our cultural training against a near-peer adversary who's going to have a lot more capability to break that chain than somebody like ISIS, as well, and leading into our own problems in executing and cultivating mission command. What do you think we're ready to operate in that environment today effectively?
What's interesting about that? It isn't just that environment that we're unable to operate in. It's the previous environment we're unable to operate in. And I'll give you an example. All right, let's talk about the most, basic prosaic kill chain, which is call for fire, right? Call for fire to, artillery for FSC, everything that we have been doing for decades. You know how many calls for fire we see at MWX coming from platoon level below? Very few. Now, CAT platoons are an exception. They seem to train their guys, and they're all on the conduct of FINET. So remember, think about this. I'm talking about stuff that's familiar to all of us. I'm not talking about esoteric stuff yet, right? But we talk about this. If you brought in a squad leader in the room and you said, do a call for fire, you could probably do it. But the point is, we don't operate in a manner that makes that just a habit of action. And it became, I wrote an article about MWX, right, and the Brits, that ridiculous Daily Telegraph article saying, the Brits, forced U.S. Marines to surrender. Well, I mean, absolutely, I meant everything in that article. It was absurd, but the Brits did show us a number of things that we, and these aren't soft guys. They are, they're conventional dudes. But it's all about training. So one of the things they all know it. They all have the communications net set up, that their habits of thought and action to enable everyone to do a call for fire. All right. And again, it's not just by training. It's just, what do you want to do if you're a squad leader and you want to call for fire? It's like, oh, it's a contact fire net, and then I've seen this. It's like, who's that dude? What's he calling? We don't practice it enough in training. That's a very prosaic example. But you asked about the kill chain, so we got to get used to just working kill chain through the mechanisms that we're already familiar with before we get to things that we're not familiar with. The other part about this too is organic weapons down at squad level. I know that there are initiatives afoot to field things like the Hero, or what's the other one? Spike,
and close.
Yes. Yeah. But we've got to expedite that, because the weapons we have, the organic weapons at squad level, are frankly obsolete. Even Switchblade, right? Switchblade only has, that's a kind of kamikaze drone, right? Mm-hmm. Switchblade has a range, I think, of about 10 clicks. So it's not long range, but it's longer range than anything available at squad level right now. Why aren't we fielding that and training our guys to use that? You see what I'm saying? We've been talking about this for a long time, but we're not doing it yet at all. Now let's talk about a little bit of a leap to areas of combined arms, because I'm going to keep using the term combined arms, because we can talk about MDO, multi-domain operations, or I forget what the other services are calling it. There's various terms for it, but the bottom line is that it's still combined arms. We just haven't gotten the mindset of bringing these other things like electromagnetic spectrum, jamming, all the things I talk about, signals intelligence, as tools within that kit of combined arms. We think of it as something as being esoteric. And I'll say just one other thing, and then I'll shut up. All right. We always talk about maneuver warfare influencing the mind of our adversary commanders, but we never do it. When we approach deception, we either come up with a completely half-assed, ridiculous attempt, or we make it absurdly complex, instead of just thinking of it as presenting ambiguity, right? Artillery is starting to learn to do this pretty well. Dummy positions, you fire a artillery mission, you displace, and then you put dummy guns in those positions, right? Knowing that the enemy is going to vector in onto your position and fire a counter battery fire, but hit wrong. That's just a very simple example. That again, it's not a habit of thought of an action with us. And then, it's slightly higher than tactical level. Why aren't we focusing on the personalities, motivations of commanders who we're opposing? And, even again, at the tactical or operational level, focusing messaging specifically on them. Using Pulse, which we have in our inventory, sending text messages. Hey, dude, we know who you are, blah, blah, blah. If you do this, you're dead. Or if you do this, this will happen. Bad things will happen. We don't focus on the psychological spectrum. So a lot of things I'm talking about are failures of imagination and training. They're not, yes, when I talk about long-range precision fires, yeah, that's an equipping piece. But everything else is just mindset. We've got to alter our mindset.
Well, yeah, that last comment about the personalities and motives of the Indian commander, that reminded me, So do you have some story about an exercise in McTog where somebody did that to the like one of the commanders and the person lost their mind? Like,
so in some of the previous MWXs at the division level, you had some of the MIG decks that would essentially create flyers and posts that were derogatory to the commander, but the sergeants major would lose their mind. And the commanders, I think it happened once or twice where it was intentional. It was done with purpose to try and get into the commander's OODA loop. And it did, but the problem is the lesson learned was just don't piss off the commander, because they basically had him stop because it made them so angry. But it was operationally effective. It achieved a point, but the training units missed that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, when we're talking full spectrum use of social media, you know, when in the Siege of SODIF and Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force in Iraq, we would use social media a tremendous amount, and we didn't. So where we in areas where and you've got to be careful about this, obviously, because it's easier to drop bombs on people than it is to get onto social media and try and manipulate their thoughts or the perceptions as far as authority. So while we were on thin ice, we would the Iraqis would do it for us, because they had no, obviously they've got the advantage of being culturally adept and understanding what works and does not work, but also they're not bound by the same restrictions that we are. So using social media for to focus not just on the enemy, but also local population, letting them know what is going on. BDA, the Islamic State had this great habit when they lost important guys, they would put these kind of banner websites up with a list of the heroes who had died in a particular operation, so you'd be able to keep track of enemy commanders who had been removed from play. I'm not exaggerating here. It was it was quite extraordinary. So that's why control of the internet becomes such a valuable tool. The Islamic State's a great example. I mean, they shut down internet. They tried to ensure that the only internet available was the one generated by them, with their media kiosks and everything. And we, in our turn, with varying success, worked on ways to project internet into occupied territories in denied areas, so that we could message not just the local population, but the Islamic State itself. I'm going to give you another example. Okay, so the reason why I'm giving these examples are to explain that the things I'm talking about, they may have been practiced recently by Special Operations Forces, but they should by no means be capabilities. They're not capabilities that are confined for any reason to Special Operations Forces. So, taking the Islamic State as an example, very, very basic kind of signals intelligence. Listening to them talk on their handheld radios, just and they're complaining. They're complaining about not getting paid. They're complaining that foreign fighters get paid more than them, get the best wives. So there's divisions within the enemy, and so our messaging using the Iraqis, so it's credible, drives a wedge in those divisions. Hey, the foreign fighters are about to, they're going to let you die. You're going to fight for Mosul. They're going to disappear. And there's some truth in this too. Like all the best messaging, there is a kernel of truth there. And just building on that, creating divisions. The other thing, getting to the point about working on the commanders. This is a kinetic solution, but we in the United States, we love military. We love taking out the top leadership of the terrorist organization. It makes us feel there's kind of a visceral satisfaction. But time and again, we learn it does nothing. There's always someone else waiting to step into his place, and sometimes that guy is even more dangerous than his predecessor. You just have to track. This isn't me just waxing lyrical. I mean, you look. We took out Zakawi. But the war got worse after Zakawi was killed. I'm not saying there's a connection. I'm just saying that removing Zakawi didn't really matter. We finally got bin Laden long beyond when he was even relevant, right, to Al Qaeda. Same thing with Baghdadi. We get him after the caliphate's almost destroyed, and the Islamic State had already become kind of a virtual caliphate. And so anyway, we're always a step behind, and even when we aren't, we achieve nothing, we achieve very little. But there are leaders in any organization who are the real power brokers. And in the Islamic State, it was kind of their equivalent of their battalion commanders, right? And so working out kind of that formula in Iraq, it became relatively simple of tracing who these guys are. I say relatively simple because I'm not the one having to do it, but we have guys, signals intelligence capability, to find out where these guys are, not kill them right off the bat, but wait right before an operation. The attack on Rutba, I think, which is one of those articles, great example. And right before the operation, you take out all his tactical level commanders. And we found that the Islamic State fighters, although they were happy to fight to the death if there was a voice on the radio, if there wasn't, they were not interested in staying at all. It was remarkable. And so it was a great example. About 20 fighters stayed to defend the town. It was a walkover. You contrast that with a place like Ramadi, where we didn't do that, and that was a month. That was months of hard slogging and lots of casualties for the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. So again, these are, we are, think about it. Think about the United States, the technological level of technological competence, the depth that we have. We have the ability to do this stuff, but we don't have guys. We have very few guys who have been trained to think along those lines, right?
Yeah. So I want to kind of follow through on the information piece a little bit, and I'm also looking at the clock to make sure we get you to your next thing because I think your escort's here. But contrasting, the technology, right? Like we built the modern information domain, right? The internet and all the little pieces that plug into it. But as you point out, like it's people like ISIS or Al Qaeda or other groups who really know how to use it to do their narrative and their messaging, and we know that they know how to use it because we see it on like the nightly news or on social media. But when you talk about you look at what is the U.S. military doing in that, and I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but like it's stuff like the latest dumb text message on Army WTF moments, right? Or what did this Lance Corporal do on TikTok in the barracks? Mm-hmm. Why do you think we have struggled to effectively use these things that we largely built? And what do you think we need to do to flip that paradigm so that we're able to use it to own that information domain that we built, but our adversaries are, as you said, way ahead of us on in terms of exploiting?
Yeah, I think we have to. I think it's not a military cultural problem. I think it's a cultural problem just within the at policymaker level with influencing people's minds. And I don't know where this traces back to, but it's an interesting anecdote that may be apocryphal from the 60s, where the military was the government was experimenting with the use of LSD as a weapon, right? And word got out, and it became a really controversial issue. Well, why should that be so controversial? It's not poison gas, it's meanwhile we're making free use of napalm in Vietnam, but somehow this idea that we're messing with people's minds is a red line. And so we see it time and time again, and that the cliche about it's easier to drop a bomb on someone than send them a Twitter message is sadly true. We've got to overcome that. And I've dealt with this as in a TSOC, and I understand why there are parameters in place, but I think we need to make it a little bit easier. So use of social media, use of the internet, sending messages, or trying to manipulate the thoughts of an adversary using the internet as a medium are things that we've got to make easier, and we've got to make open them to conventional forces too. The U.S., don't get me wrong, I mean, U.S. military has made great strides here. There is, there is a, for instance, the initiative that took off in, and I'm just forgetting the name of the operation. That's probably just as well, and because the name itself linked with what they were doing may be classified, but essentially it was going after, it was a multinational effort to go after recruiting sources for the Islamic State, okay, based out of Jordan, and that was tremendously successful. So we can do this. We just need to make it again just kind of run of the mill and train conventional units down to the tactical level. And yes, you can make sure that it's administered, and but if we're going to give people, again, if we're going to give people, as quite rightly we do, the ability to kill people, then we should at least focus on changing their minds. I think, so yes, I answer your question, Ian, too lengthy, but yeah, I think there's a cultural barrier we have to overcome. And the other part about that too is cyber. So, there's, what I've been talking about is use of the cyber spectrum, as it were, as a medium, but there's also cyber, changing ones to zeros, right? Yeah. Cyber as a weapon. I think I know that Marvel Cybercom, at a higher level, the United States has great capability, but we need to start pushing that down too. I know this sounds like blasphemy to some, but why can't we use cyber at the tactical level? Yes, of course, you circumscribe the use of it with permissions, but we don't have to make the bar so high, right? Look at the way our adversaries are already using cyber. Why can't we? I mean, as a form of suppression, as a form of deterrent, it's an ideal tool, and we should be training our guys down at that level now to use it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think I made a similar point in an article I wrote like 6 years ago, and I think especially we should do it, but also if we're going to be in that near-peer environment where our higher cyber could be potentially, contested or denied. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to say you can still do it when hire's not around.
Absolutely,
because that's probably going to be contested or denied.
Yep.
Okay, gentlemen, any other questions?
Many, but not enough time for that, sir.
I have one.
Yeah.
So in some of your writings, you talked about how some of the foreign perceptions of our partners and allies, and the way that we are risk averse, perhaps we value hard work more than results. It's a mirror that was held up to us that was very harshly received. How do we get better at actually being able to be willing to incorporate those types of perspectives? It's the way that we analyze our own culture and potentially adapt it to be better to succeed in this 21st century environment that we're talking about.
Yeah, good question too. And I think, you're referring to the article I wrote about losing small wars, right? And it was when I was trying to recruit's the wrong word, bring on British officers to work in the siege of Sodif. And we got some extraordinarily talented officers, but from friends in the British military, I did kind of get an outside perspective of how we are viewed. And we're viewed as having a tremendous capacity for hard work, but not necessarily connected to output, right? Just work for the sake of work, which is seen as being, it's a deterrent for someone who wants to deploy with a U.S. unit. And there is truth in that too. You think about it. You deploy, everyone's talking about, I worked 18 hours, but are we any better for it? No, I would argue not. I mean, we lose the one Brit who was assigned to, he was actually, I won't mention his name, but he's deputy commander of 82nd Airborne Division. So he wasn't just some, complaining lieutenant. Said to me, you know what? We lose the capacity for creative thought after about 2 or 3 months because we were in our cubicles and we're working 7 days a week, and we just exhaust ourselves. And the time when you most need creative thought, right, and for your leadership, we've got to get over that. Again, this comes back to culture. So a lot of things I talked about earlier, that whole cliche, work smarter, not harder. We talk about it, but we don't do that. And we've got to, we've got to start bringing in the right sort of people and training them in the right way to understand that. Does that answer your question? There was, I'll just, one other comment of that. When I wrote an article for Task and Purpose about the Brits, kind of popping the balloon about the Daily Telegraph article saying that the Brits made the US Marines surrender, blah, blah, blah. I got a really good email. I mean, a very well-written email from Royal Marine and a sergeant. And he said, yeah, that was really embarrassing that the papers wrote that. And he said his an honest perception though. And he went through, the strengths of the U.S. Marines, and among them, he said, hey, the way you guys do recruit training is actually really good for the amount of numbers you come in. And he commented about things like marksmanship, as an example. It was he obviously knew a lot he worked a lot with U.S. Marines. But he said, having said all those positive things, and I've got a lot of friends, U.S. Marines, here's some just observations over the years. And again, it came down to, you guys you just seem so blinkered by having to appear to work hard and, always have your nose to the grindstone. Your officers do too much, which means that your enlisted guys just don't have enough room to grow. He commented about our enlisted education, saying you don't treat your enlisted guys, I forget what the term he used, but you don't treat them like adults. You don't treat them like adults who need to evolve and learn. And I read that and I thought, yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. And he said, and this is really going to hurt us, and he said, when it comes down to like the OODA loop and tempo, you are much slower than even the British conventional army. Now, your listeners can agree with that or not agree with that. I would say we're certainly slower than we think we are. Absolutely slower. We always talk about this OODA loop, and it's a good, it's a great, we can talk about terms of OODA loop or kill chain. We are very slow. We've got to get better at that. So I think we need to take board outside criticism, with a pinch of salt. I mean, we do a lot of things. I'm not with a pinch of salt, but with, just kind of emotional intelligence, taking the good and rejecting the stuff that is just rivalry, right? Hopefully that answers your question.
Great, thank you, sir. So I think we're out of questions here on our end. So I can give you the last word. Any final comments?
Yeah, well, guys, thanks very much. This was, it's a great pleasure coming here. I know I talk too much, but these are things that I genuinely feel passionate about, and I feel passionate about them because, like you, I do love the organization. I mean, and like any family, right? Because after a period of time, whether we like it or not, we are closer. We spend more time with our fellow Marines than we do with our families. So it becomes a family. Like any family, you've got to be honest about the things that are not good, that we need to improve. Thank you.
Yeah,
guys.
thank
Great
you, sir.
pleasure.
Again, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for joining us today. Make sure you're following us on social media for the registration link to our first live audience broadcast of 2022, which will feature the return of one of our non-resident fellows. Colonel Zenki Merarens will talk us through the truths, comedy, and myths around the genesis of modern wargaming in To Dice or Not to Dice? That's the question. The origins of the Prussian Kriegspiel. He'll be with us next Wednesday, January 19th, so watch for the registration details, and we'll see you all then.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.